The winter of 1879 brought death on bitter winds to Butte, Montana. But Hattie Morgan didn't plan to die, especially not beneath a weathered wagon with nothing but a threadbare blanket between her and the merciless cold. Her chest burned with each shallow breath, the fever making the snow-laden mountains around her blur into hazy shadows as consciousness slipped away like water through cupped hands. Virgil Calloway noticed the abandoned wagon first odd, given the brewing blizzard, but it was the barely visible Butte peeking out beneath it that stopped him cold. He'd seen enough death in his 30 years to recognize its approach, and as he pulled the half-frozen woman into his arms, feeling the dangerous heat of fever beneath ice-cold skin, he made a silent vow that death wouldn't claim this stranger, not today, not on his watch. The snow fell in earnest as Virgil mounted his horse with Hattie secured against his chest. His cabin lay 3 miles north through increasingly treacherous terrain. The wind howled with otherworldly fury, as if death itself protested the rescue of its intended victim. Virgil tucked the woman's face against his coat, shielding her from the worst of the elements. "Stay with me," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him over the storm. Her breathing came in ragged, wet gasps that spoke of fluid-filled lungs pneumonia, most likely. Left untreated in these conditions, it was practically a death sentence. The gelding beneath him trudged valiantly through deepening snow, his broad chest pushing forward as his powerful legs carried their double burden. Virgil kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, watching for the familiar silhouette of his cabin through the swirling white. The woman stirred slightly, a moan escaping pale, cracked lips. "Hush now," Virgil said, adjusting his hold to better support her head. "Almost there." It was a lie they were barely halfway, but the words seemed to settle her. Her eyelids fluttered briefly, revealing fever-bright blue eyes that locked onto his face with startling clarity before sliding closed again. Something tightened in Virgil's chest that had nothing to do with the cold. By the time the cabin finally came into view, Virgil's fingers were numb despite his thick leather gloves, and the woman had grown alarmingly still. He dismounted awkwardly, cradling her against him as he fumbled with the cabin door. Inside, the embers of morning's fire still glowed faintly. Virgil laid the woman on his bed before stoking the fire with desperate efficiency. Heat was the first priority, heat, and then medicine. As flames leapt to life, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls, Virgil returned to the unconscious woman. She was young, mid-20s, perhaps with auburn hair matted by snow and sweat. Her face, though flushed with fever, bore a natural beauty that even illness couldn't disguise. More pressing than her appearance, however, was the bluish tint to her lips and the shallow, labored rise and fall of her chest. Virgil had nursed men through pneumonia during the war. He knew the signs, knew the treatments, knew the odds. Without proper medicine, many didn't survive, but he'd be damned if he wouldn't try everything within his power. He worked quickly, removing her sodden outer garments while maintaining her modesty with blankets. He brewed a strong tea of wild cherry bark and honey, lifting her head to help her swallow small sips between bouts of coughing that racked her slender frame. He crushed mustard seeds into a paste, spreading it across a cloth to create a plaster for her chest. The pungent smell filled the cabin as he worked, his hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. Night fell, and the storm outside reached its furious peak. Virgil sat beside the bed, bathing the woman's forehead with cool water as her fever raged. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering incoherently, other times crying out in fear or pain. During one brief moment of lucidity, her eyes opened, focusing on him with effort. "Where?" She managed, the single word triggering a coughing spasm that left her gasping. "You're safe," Virgil answered, supporting her through the coughing fit. "Found you under a wagon. I'm Virgil Calloway. This is my cabin about 3 miles north of where I found you." "Hattie," she whispered when she could speak again. "Hattie Morgan." "Well, Miss Morgan, you've got a nasty case of pneumonia, but we're fighting it." He offered her water, which she accepted gratefully. "Can you tell me what you were doing under that wagon?" Her eyes clouded, either with confusion or the returning grip of fever. "The stage broke down." Driver said. Butte was close, started walking but got so tired. Her voice trailed off as her eyes fluttered closed. "So tired." "Rest now," Virgil said softly, though she was already unconscious again. He adjusted the blankets around her shoulders and resumed his vigil, listening to the battle in her lungs with each labored breath. The night stretched endlessly, marked by Hattie's worsening condition. Her breathing became more erratic, her fever climbing despite Virgil's best efforts. Around midnight, she began to shiver violently, teeth chattering as her body fought the infection. Virgil knew what was happening, he'd seen it before. The fever was dangerously high, her body struggling against an enemy it couldn't defeat alone. Without thinking twice, he added wood to the fire, stripped down to his long underwear and slid beneath the blankets beside her. "Forgive the impropriety, Miss Morgan," he murmured as he wrapped his arms around her trembling form, sharing his body heat. "But I don't intend to let you die tonight." The hours passed in tense vigilance. Virgil dozed intermittently, always jolting awake at the slightest change in Hattie's breathing. He continued applying cool compresses to her forehead while keeping her body warm against his. He whispered encouragement when she stirred restlessly, promised safety when she cried out in fever dreams. Dawn broke with tentative fingers of light through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Hattie's fever had broken sometime in the early morning hours. Her skin was cool and damp with sweat, but her breathing, while still congested, came more regularly now. Virgil eased himself from the bed, his muscles stiff from maintaining one position for so long. He stoked the fire, put coffee on to boil, and checked his patient once more. Her face was peaceful in sleep, the flush of fever replaced by the pallor of exhaustion. Still, she was alive, she had survived the night. While the coffee percolated, Virgil stepped outside to tend to his horse and gather more firewood. The world was transformed by the blizzard, pristine white extending in every direction, broken only by the dark silhouettes of pine trees. The beauty of it struck him anew, as it always did after a storm, nature's reminder of its awesome power and indifferent grace. Back inside, a soft sound from the bed drew his attention. Hattie was awake, struggling to sit up against the pillows. Virgil quickly moved to assist her. "Easy now," he cautioned, supporting her back with one hand. "You're still very weak." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "for saving my life." Virgil poured a cup of coffee, adding a generous amount of honey before bringing it to her. Anyone would have done the same. Hattie accepted the cup with trembling hands. "No," she said with surprising firmness. "They wouldn't have. I've learned that lesson well enough." She took a small sip, wincing as the hot liquid passed her raw throat. "How long have I been here?" "Just one night," Virgil answered, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "Though it was touch and go for a while. Your pneumonia is severe, you'll need rest and care for at least a week, probably longer." Concern shadowed her face. "I can't impose." "You're not imposing if you're invited," Virgil interrupted gently. "And where else would you go? The town's likely snowed in, the stage won't run until the pass clears, and you're in no condition to travel." Hattie looked down at her hands, still curled around the coffee cup. "I don't have much money to pay you for your trouble." "I'm not asking for payment," Virgil said, slightly offended at the suggestion. "Just focus on getting better." A weak coughing spell overtook her then, and Virgil quickly retrieved a handkerchief, supporting her shoulders as she struggled for breath. When it passed, she sagged against him, exhausted by the simple act of sitting up and talking. "Rest now," he urged, easing her back against the pillows. "We can talk more when you're stronger." Hattie didn't argue, her eyelids already drooping with fatigue. Within moments, she was asleep again, her breathing punctuated by the rattle in her chest that reminded Virgil the danger wasn't fully past. Over the next 3 days, Virgil established a routine. He prepared broths and teas, helped Hattie sit up to eat and drink, and continued applying mustard plasters to her chest. In between caring for his patient, he tended to his horse, chopped wood, and made brief trips to check his trap lines. On the 4th day, Hattie was strong enough to sit up for longer periods. The worst of the pneumonia had passed, though a persistent cough remained. Her appetite had improved, and with it, her spirits. "I never asked what happened to your wagon train," Virgil remarked as they shared a simple supper of rabbit stew. He'd set up a small table beside the bed so she wouldn't have to move. "It wasn't a wagon train," Hattie explained, breaking off a piece of cornbread. "Just the stage coach." "I was traveling alone from Helena." Virgil raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual for a young woman." A shadow crossed her face. "I had my reasons for leaving quickly." The defensiveness in her tone suggested this was a painful subject, so Virgil didn't press further. Instead, he asked, "Where were you headed?" "San Francisco, eventually," she replied, seeming relieved by the change in focus. "I have a cousin there who offered me a position in her dressmaking shop." Virgil nodded. "You're a seamstress, then?" "I am." A genuine smile brightened her face for the first time. "I've been sewing since I was a girl. My father always said I could thread a needle in the dark." "A valuable skill out here," Virgil commented. "Butte's growing fast with the mining boom." "I'd wager there's work for a skilled seamstress without traveling all the way to California." Hattie's smile faltered. "Perhaps, but I promised my cousin." Again, Virgil sensed there was more to the story, but he respected her privacy. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Later, as Virgil prepared to sleep on his makeshift pallet near the fire, Hattie called softly from the bed. "Mr. Calloway." "Virgil, please," he corrected. "Virgil," she amended. "I want to thank you again, not just for finding me, but for—" Her voice wavered slightly. "For treating me with respect, for being a gentleman." Something in her words, the implication that she expected otherwise, stirred a protective instinct in Virgil's chest. "You don't need to thank me for basic human decency, Miss Morgan," Hattie, she offered in return. "And yes, I do. It's been uncommon in my experience lately." Virgil studied her in the firelight, noting the wariness that lingered behind her gratitude. "Well, Hattie, you're safe here." "That's a promise." Her smile was small but genuine. "Good night, Virgil." "Good night, Hattie." As the days passed, Hattie's strength gradually returned. By the end of the first week, she was able to move around the cabin, though Virgil insisted she take it slowly. They fell into an easy companionship, sharing meals and conversation by the fire in the evenings. Virgil learned that Hattie was 24, orphaned 2 years prior, when influenza took both her parents within days of each other. She was well educated. Her mother had been a schoolteacher before marriage, and had a quick mind that he found increasingly engaging. For her part, Hattie discovered that Virgil was 30, a former Union soldier who'd come west after the war seeking peace rather than gold. He'd built his cabin with his own hands, lived primarily off the land, and occasionally worked as a guide for hunting parties or survey teams. "Don't you get lonely out here?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Hattie mending one of Virgil's shirts while he whittled a piece of pine. "Sometimes," he admitted, his knife pausing, "but I find the mountains better company than most people, less complicated." Hattie's hand stilled on her sewing. "You've been hurt." It wasn't a question. Virgil met her gaze, surprised by her perception. "Haven't we all?" "Yes," she agreed softly. "I suppose we have." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the snap of the fire and the soft sound of Virgil's knife against wood. There was understanding in that silence, a recognition of kindred wounded spirits that needed no words. The next morning, Virgil announced he needed to make a trip into Butte for supplies. "The snow's melted enough on the main trails," he explained as he pulled on his heavy coat. "I should be back by nightfall. Will you be all right alone?" Hattie nodded, though a flicker of anxiety crossed her features. "Of course, I'm much better now." Virgil hesitated at the door. "Hattie, is there something you're afraid of? Someone, perhaps?" Her eyes widened slightly before she composed her expression. "What makes you ask that?" "Just an observation," he said carefully. "You seem watchful, like someone expecting trouble to find them." Hattie looked down at her hands. "It's nothing for you to worry about." Virgil crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "If someone is looking for you, if you're in some kind of danger, I'd like to know. Not to pry, but to help if I can." The gentle concern in his voice seemed to break something inside her. Hattie's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back stubbornly. "There was a man in Helena," she began hesitantly. "Gerald Weissman, a banker's son with political ambitions. He began calling on me after my parents died when I was working as a seamstress for his mother." Her voice strengthened as she continued, as if unburdening herself of a heavy weight. "At first he seemed kind, respectable, but when I refused his marriage proposal, he changed." Virgil's hands tightened slightly around hers. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," Hattie clarified quickly. "But he began spreading rumors, horrible, vicious lies. Said I'd compromised myself with him, that I was using my parents' death to solicit sympathy and charity." Her voice grew bitter. "In a small town like Helena, such rumors spread quickly. I lost my position, my reputation. No one would hire me." "So you fled," Virgil concluded. Hattie nodded. "My cousin in San Francisco wrote that she could use help in her shop. It seemed providential, a chance to start fresh where no one knew me or the lies told about me." "And you think this man might pursue you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He was very angry when I sold my parents' house and prepared to leave. He threatened that I'd never escape him, that he had connections everywhere." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Probably just threats born of wounded pride, but you can't be sure," Virgil finished for her. He rose, still holding her hands. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I'll keep an eye out in town, see if anyone's been asking about a young woman matching your description." Relief softened Hattie's features. "Thank you." Virgil retrieved his rifle and checked it carefully before slinging it over his shoulder. "Bar the door after I leave," he instructed. "I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more when I return so you'll know it's me." Hattie followed him to the door. "Be careful," she said softly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something neither was ready to acknowledge but both felt stirring in their hearts. "Always am," Virgil replied with a reassuring smile before heading out into the crisp morning air. The ride to Butte took longer than usual, due to muddy trails left by melting snow, but Virgil made good time nonetheless. The mining town was bustling despite the recent storm, its streets alive with the diverse humanity drawn by silver and copper. Miners, merchants, ladies of questionable virtue, Chinese laborers, and sharply dressed speculators from back east. Virgil handled his business efficiently: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition, and a few other necessities. At the general store, he hesitated before adding a small bottle of rose-scented soap to his purchases, telling himself it was a practical consideration for Hattie's comfort, nothing more. As he loaded his supplies onto his horse, Virgil casually inquired whether the stagecoach from Helena had reported any missing passengers. The station master confirmed what he'd suspected in the confusion of the storm. No one had realized a passenger had gone missing until the stage reached Butte. "Young woman," they said. "Traveling alone to San Francisco," the station master recalled, scratching his beard. "We figured she'd changed her plans in Helena and never boarded. Stage company's already written it off. They've got enough troubles with schedules disrupted by the storm." "Anyone been asking about her, looking for her?" Virgil pressed. The station master eyed him curiously. "Not that I recall. Why, you know something about this woman?" "No," Virgil lied smoothly. "Just heard talk in the saloon. Thought it strange nobody seemed concerned." Before leaving town, Virgil made one final stop at the telegraph office. He composed a brief message to the sheriff in Helena, an old Army comrade, asking discreetly about Gerald Weissman and any recent trouble involving a seamstress named Morgan. It might be nothing, but Virgil had learned to trust his instincts. The sun was setting by the time Virgil returned to the cabin, the sky painted in spectacular shades of orange and purple above the mountains. He knocked as promised 3 times, paused twice more, and heard the bar being removed from inside. Hattie opened the door, relief evident on her face. "You're back." "As promised," Virgil replied, leading his horse to the small stable attached to the cabin. "Give me a few minutes to settle him, and I'll bring in the supplies." When he entered the cabin with his arms full of parcels, Virgil was struck by the transformation. The small space was tidier than he'd ever managed to make it, with his few dishes washed and neatly stacked, the floor swept, and even his meager collection of books arranged on their shelf. A savory aroma filled the air from a pot simmering over the fire. "You didn't need to do all this," he said, setting down his purchases. "I wanted to," Hattie replied simply. "You've done so much for me. Besides, I was restless with nothing to do." She gestured toward the pot. "It's just rabbit stew again, but I found some wild onions growing near the woodpile and added those." Virgil suddenly felt overwhelmed by the simple domesticity of the scene: the welcoming cabin, the meal prepared, Hattie standing there with color in her cheeks and a tentative smile on her lips. It had been so long since he'd returned to anything other than an empty, cold home. "It smells wonderful," he managed, removing his coat. "Thank you." As they ate supper, Virgil recounted his trip to town, carefully omitting his inquiries about her. "I brought you something," he said when they'd finished, retrieving the small brown paper package from his saddlebag. Hattie unwrapped it curiously, her expression softening when she revealed the bottle of rose soap. "Oh, Virgil," she breathed, removing the stopper to inhale the fragrance. "This is lovely, but you shouldn't have spent your money on such a luxury." "It's hardly extravagant," he demurred, pleased by her reaction. "And I thought, well, a lady should have proper soap." "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes with genuine warmth. "Truly." That night, as they sat by the fire, Virgil playing a simple tune on his harmonica while Hattie sewed, he found himself watching her more than usual. The firelight caught the auburn highlights in her hair, and her fingers moved with graceful precision as she repaired a tear in one of his shirts. He wondered what it would be like to have this every evening, this quiet companionship, this gentle presence in his solitary life. The thought startled him. Virgil had never considered sharing his cabin, his life, with anyone. After the war, after Catherine's betrayal, he'd purposely sought isolation, finding comfort in the predictable rhythms of nature rather than the chaotic emotions of human relationships. Yet here was Hattie, slipping past his defenses with her quiet strength and gentle spirit. Virgil lowered his harmonica, the tune fading into thoughtful silence. Hattie glanced up, catching his gaze. "Why did you stop? It was lovely." "Just thinking," he replied, setting the instrument aside. "How are your lungs feeling? Any improvement?" "Much better," she assured him, though a small cough belied her words. "The tightness is nearly gone. I should be well enough to travel soon." Virgil felt an unexpected pang at the thought of her leaving. "There's no rush," he said carefully. "Winter in these mountains can be treacherous well into April. You should be fully recovered before attempting such a journey." Hattie's hands stilled on her sewing. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It's not an imposition," Virgil insisted. "The truth is, He hesitated, unaccustomed to expressing such sentiments. "I've enjoyed having someone to talk with. The company." A soft smile curved Hattie's lips. "I've enjoyed it too." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings growing beyond mere gratitude or obligation. Neither acted upon it, but both felt the change, like the first faint stirrings of spring beneath winter's snow. The next morning, Virgil woke to the sound of Hattie coughing a deep, racking cough that alarmed him immediately. He found her sitting up in bed, her face flushed with returning fever as she struggled for breath between spasms. "It came on suddenly," she gasped when she could speak. "During the night, I thought it was just the usual cough, but it's worse." Virgil pressed his palm to her forehead, feeling the heat of fever. "The pneumonia's flared up again," he said grimly. "Sometimes it happens just when you think you're recovering. We need to get that fever down." He worked quickly, brewing willow bark tea for the fever and preparing another mustard plaster. Hattie's condition deteriorated rapidly throughout the day, her breathing becoming more labored, her coughing more violent. By evening, she was delirious, murmuring incoherently between fits of coughing that brought up alarming amounts of phlegm streaked with blood. Virgil had seen enough pneumonia cases during the war to recognize the seriousness of the relapse. The nearest doctor was in Butte, a journey impossible for Hattie in her condition and dangerous for Virgil to attempt with another storm threatening on the horizon. As night fell, he sat beside her bed, bathing her burning forehead with cool water and supporting her through each coughing fit. "Fight, Hattie," he urged when her breathing became frighteningly shallow. "You have to fight this." Through the long night, Virgil battled death itself for Hattie's life. When her fever spiked dangerously high, he stripped her to her undergarments and bathed her with cool water. Modesty be damned. When she couldn't catch her breath, he lifted her against his chest, rubbing her back and murmuring encouragement until the spasm passed. When delirium took her, he held her hands to prevent her from thrashing and harming herself. Dawn approached with agonizing slowness. Hattie's condition seemed to worsen with each passing hour, her strength ebbing like a receding tide. Virgil, exhausted beyond measure, felt desperation clawing at his throat. "Don't you dare leave me," he whispered fiercely, cradling her limp hand against his cheek. "Not now, not when I've just found you." The admission that he had found something precious in this woman who'd arrived in his life by chance stunned him with its clarity and truth. Somewhere between rescuing her from beneath that wagon and nursing her through illness, Virgil Calloway had begun to fall in love with Hattie Morgan. The realization galvanized him. He remembered an old remedy his grandmother had used, a poultice of raw onions and garlic, pungent and powerful. With renewed determination, Virgil prepared the mixture, adding a splash of whiskey for good measure. He applied the poultice to Hattie's chest, wrapped her in warm blankets, and continued the battle against the infection ravaging her lungs. Morning broke, and with it came the first sign of hope. Hattie's fever began to subside. Her breathing, while still labored, became less desperate. By midday, she was able to take small sips of broth and willow bark tea without triggering immediate coughing. "You're the most stubborn patient I've ever had," Virgil told her when her eyes finally opened with lucidity. "Had me worried half to death." A ghost of a smile touched Hattie's pale lips. "Can't die before I finish mending your shirts," she whispered hoarsely. Virgil laughed, the sound catching in his throat as relief washed over him. "Is that all that kept you fighting? My unmended shirts?" "No," she murmured, her eyes holding his with unexpected directness despite her weakness. "Not just that." The days that followed were filled with careful nursing and gradual recovery. This time, Virgil was taking no chances. He insisted on complete bed rest, monitoring every sign of improvement or setback with vigilant attention. Hattie protested the restrictions initially but eventually yielded to his determined care. "You're worse than my mother was," she complained one afternoon, though her tone held more affection than annoyance. "I'm well enough to sit by the fire at least." "Another day of rest," Virgil insisted, adjusting her pillows. "That relapse nearly—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. "Just humor me." Hattie's expression softened. "You saved my life, again." "You did the hard part," he countered, "fighting to stay alive." "I had something worth fighting for," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his with meaning that made his heart beat faster. Neither spoke for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Virgil cleared his throat. "I should check the trap lines. We're running low on meat." "Virgil," Hattie called as he reached the door. When he turned, she asked simply, "Why did you really bring me here that day? Why not take me to town where there's a doctor?" The question surprised him. "The blizzard was coming in fast. You wouldn't have survived the longer journey to Butte." "But you couldn't have known I would survive here either," she pressed. "With only you to care for me, why take that risk for a stranger?" Virgil considered her question seriously. "I've seen too much death," he finally answered. "During the war, after. I couldn't just ride past and leave you to die, not when there was a chance, even if that chance was slim, even then." Virgil met her gaze steadily. "Life is precious, Hattie, all life." Something in his words seemed to touch her deeply. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're a good man, Virgil Calloway." He shook his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just a man trying to do right. Rest now. I'll be back before dark." As promised, Hattie improved steadily over the following days. Soon she was able to move around the cabin freely, though Virgil still insisted she avoid overexertion. Their routine adjusted accordingly. Hattie took over more of the cooking and household tasks, while Virgil handled the hunting, trapping, and heavier chores. They made a surprisingly compatible pair. Virgil, accustomed to solitude, found himself enjoying Hattie's presence, her gentle humor, and her intelligent conversation. For her part, Hattie seemed to bloom in the peaceful isolation of the cabin, away from the judgment and cruelty she'd experienced in Helena. One evening, as spring's first tentative warmth began to soften winter's grip, Virgil returned from checking his trap lines to find Hattie sitting outside on the rough-hewn bench beside the cabin door. The setting sun illuminated her auburn hair like a halo of fire, and for a moment he simply stood at the edge of the clearing, transfixed by the sight. She looked up, sensing his presence, and smiled a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face and sent an unexpected warmth through Virgil's chest. "I thought I'd enjoy the fresh air," she explained as he approached. "It feels wonderful after being cooped up for so long." Virgil set down the rabbits he'd caught and joined her on the bench. "Your color's better," he observed. "How's the cough?" "Almost gone," she replied, pulling her shawl closer around her shoulders as a cool breeze stirred the pine boughs above. "I think I'm finally truly recovering this time." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the sun sank lower behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant golds and crimsons. "I received a reply to my telegraph," Virgil said eventually, breaking the peaceful quiet. "From Helena." Hattie tensed beside him. "You sent a telegraph about me." "About Gerald Weissman," Virgil clarified. "To an old army friend who's now sheriff there. I wanted to know if you were in any real danger." Her eyes widened. And it seems your instincts were correct," Virgil said grimly. "Weissman has been asking questions, offering rewards for information about your whereabouts. He's even hired men to check stagecoach manifests in surrounding territories." Hattie paled slightly. "He's actually looking for me." "Yes, but there's more." Virgil turned to face her fully. "You're not the first woman he's harassed. The sheriff has received complaints before, but Weissman's family connections protected him from consequences. Until now." "What's changed?" "His latest target was the mayor's niece," Virgil explained. "She came forward with similar accusations, unwanted advances, threats when rejected, attempts to ruin her reputation. Between her testimony and renewed scrutiny of previous complaints, including yours, Weissman is facing serious legal trouble." Relief washed over Hattie's features. "So he won't be coming after me?" "Not anymore," Virgil confirmed. "He's preoccupied with saving his own hide. The sheriff asked if you'd be willing to provide a written statement to support the case against him." Hattie considered this for a moment, then nodded resolutely. "Yes, I'll do it. If it helps prevent him from hurting anyone else, I'll write everything that happened." Virgil smiled, proud of her courage. "I thought you might say that." They fell silent again, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Virgil was acutely aware of Hattie beside him, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the floral scent of the rose soap clinging to her skin, the way her hand rested just inches from his on the rough wood of the bench. "Does this change your plans?" he asked finally, his voice quieter than intended. "About San Francisco," Hattie gazed up at the emerging stars. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I originally fled because staying in Helena seemed impossible, but now—" she turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Now I wonder if I was running from something rather than toward something. My cousin's offer was kind, but dressmaking in San Francisco was never my dream. It was just an escape." "What is your dream, Hattie?" Virgil asked softly. She considered the question seriously. "I've always wanted a place of my own. Not grand, just mine. A home where I could use my skills, be respected for my work." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Perhaps share it with someone who understood me, have a family someday." The simple honesty of her answer touched something deep within Virgil. "Those sound like worthy dreams." "What about you?" Hattie asked. "What did you dream of before the war changed everything?" Virgil looked out at the darkening forest, considering. "I wanted land, space to breathe. Freedom to live by my own labor." He glanced at his cabin, humble but sturdy, built by his own hands. "I suppose I found that much at least." "But not all you dreamed of," Hattie observed perceptively. "No," he acknowledged. "Not all." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and Virgil felt something shift between them, a boundary dissolving, a possibility opening. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached for her hand resting on the bench between them. Hattie's fingers intertwined with his without hesitation, warm and certain. Neither spoke, words seemed unnecessary as they sat hand in hand, watching night claim the mountains around them, When the evening chill finally drove them inside, something had changed irrevocably. Neither acknowledged it directly, but as they moved around the cabin preparing a simple supper together, there was a new awareness in every glance, every accidental touch. That night, after Hattie had retired to the bed and Virgil to his pallet by the fire, he lay awake long into the night, listening to her soft, steady breathing and allowing himself, for the first time in years, to imagine a future that wasn't solitary. Spring arrived in earnest over the next weeks, the snow retreating up the mountainsides, wildflowers dotting the meadows with splashes of color. Hattie's health returned fully, her strength rebuilding with each passing day. She took to joining Virgil on short walks around the property, her natural curiosity about the wilderness endearing her to him even more. "What's this one called?" she asked, kneeling beside a cluster of delicate white flowers. "Spring Beauty," Virgil answered, watching her gentle fingers trace the pink striped petals. "The roots are edible, good in stews if game is scarce." Hattie glanced up at him with a smile. "You know so much about living off the land, I'd be completely helpless out here alone." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Virgil countered, "and quick to learn. You'd manage." "Perhaps," she conceded, rising to her feet, "but I prefer having a guide who knows where the mountain lion's den and which berries won't poison me." Virgil laughed, offering his arm as they continued their walk along the edge of the small stream that ran behind his cabin. Wise woman. As they walked, Hattie shared more about her life before Helena growing up as an only child in a small Minnesota town, her father's work as a carpenter, her mother's determination that her daughter receive an education despite limited means. "They saved for years to send me to a proper ladies' school in St. Paul," she recalled fondly. "My father took extra commissions, and my mother tutored children in the evenings. I was there for 2 years before my mother fell ill and I returned home." "They must have been very proud of you," Virgil observed. Hattie nodded, a shadow of old grief crossing her face. "They were. I miss them terribly still." She glanced at him curiously. "What about your family? You've never mentioned them." Virgil's expression grew distant. "My father died when I was 14, mining accident in Pennsylvania. My mother remarried a year later, a shopkeeper who had little use for another man's son. I left home at 16, worked my way west, then the war came." He shrugged. "Haven't been back east since. No siblings." A younger sister, Rose. "Last I heard, she was married with children in Ohio." Regret colored his voice. "We lost touch during the war." Hattie squeezed his arm sympathetically. "Perhaps you could write to her. It's never too late to rebuild a connection with family." "Perhaps," Virgil agreed, though uncertainly. So many years had passed, he wasn't sure his sister would welcome his sudden reappearance in her life. They reached a small clearing overlooking a valley, verdant with new spring growth. In the distance, the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies stood sentinel against the clear blue sky. Virgil had always found peace in this view, and now, sharing it with Hattie, it seemed even more perfect. "It's breathtaking," she murmured, gazing out at the panorama. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." "Nor have I," Virgil replied softly, though his eyes were fixed on her profile rather than the landscape. Hattie turned, catching his gaze, and a blush rose to her cheeks. "Virgil." He took her hands in his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hattie, I need to say something, and I'm not sure how to say it properly. I'm not a man of many words." "You don't need many words with me," she assured him, her eyes bright with emotion. Virgil took a deep breath. "When I found you under that wagon, I thought I was just saving a stranger's life. I didn't realize you'd end up saving mine too." He tightened his grip on her hands, willing her to understand. "Before you came, I was just existing, not really living. Virgil, Hattie whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. I know you have planned San Francisco, your cousin's shop, and I have no right to ask you to change them. But I need you to know. He faltered, then pushed forward. I love you, Hattie Morgan. These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life, and the thought of you leaving. He shook his head, unable to complete the sentence. Hattie freed one hand to touch his cheek gently. What if I don't want to leave? Hope surged through Virgil's chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that I love you too, she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. That's somewhere between nearly dying and learning to live again in your care. I found something I wasn't looking for, something precious and unexpected. Virgil felt lightheaded with joy. You'd stay, here in Montana. Not just in Montana, Hattie clarified, stepping closer to him. Here with you, if you want me. Want you? Virgil laughed incredulously. Hattie, I've never wanted anything more in my life. He pulled her gently into his arms, giving her every opportunity to step away. Instead, she came willingly, her hands resting on his chest as she gazed up at him with trusting eyes. Slowly, reverently, Virgil lowered his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tender and questioning, but as Hattie responded, winding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more passionate, a promise, a beginning, a future unfolding before them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Virgil rested his forehead against hers. I should have done that weeks ago, he murmured. Hattie laughed softly. I might have still been feverish, could have mistaken it for delirium. Then I'll just have to keep kissing you, Virgil replied with uncharacteristic playfulness. So you know it's real. Her smile was radiant as she stretched up to press another kiss to his lips. I think that can be arranged. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the world around them seemingly transformed by their newfound understanding. Every bird's song sounded sweeter, every wildflower more vibrant, every sunbeam more golden as it filtered through the pine boughs overhead. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, practical considerations eventually tempered their happiness. We should discuss what this means, Virgil said, his arm around Hattie's shoulders as she leaned against him. Practically speaking, Hattie nodded. You're right. As much as I'd like to pretend nothing exists beyond this cabin, we do need to consider the realities. I don't have much to offer you, Virgil admitted frankly. This land, the cabin, it's all good, solid, but I'm not a wealthy man. Life here is simple, sometimes hard. I don't need wealth, Hattie assured him. I need honesty, respect, partnership. I need someone who sees me for who I am. She looked up at him earnestly. I need you, Virgil. The rest we can figure out together. His heart swelled at her words. Then marry me, he said, the proposal bursting forth without preamble. Not someday, not eventually. Soon. I've wasted too many years alone already. Hattie's eyes widened, then crinkled with joy. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. Virgil kissed her again, still marveling that he could do so freely now. When they separated, he said, We'll need to go to Butte, find a preacher, make it official. And I should write to my cousin in San Francisco, Hattie added. Explain why I won't be coming after all. A thought occurred to her. Virgil, what will people think? A woman living alone with a man she barely knows, then suddenly married to him. They'll think what they will, Virgil said dismissively. We know the truth, that's what matters. After a moment, he added more gently, but if you're concerned about your reputation, we can create a more conventional story. Say you're a friend's sister, recently widowed, who came to stay after falling ill. Hattie shook her head. No, no more lies, even well-intentioned ones. The truth is strange enough. I nearly died beneath a wagon and you saved me. Twice. If people want to judge us for finding love in unusual circumstances, let them. Her courage and integrity only made Virgil love her more. We'll face it together then. In the days that followed, they made plans for their future. Virgil showed Hattie the extent of his property, 20 acres of mountain forest with the stream running through it, a small meadow suitable for a garden, and perhaps a few livestock. They discussed improvements to the cabin, an addition for more living space, proper glass windows instead of oiled paper, perhaps a separate cookstove. Hattie, practical as always, raised the question of income. "I can sew," she pointed out. There must be demand for a seamstress in Butte, with all the mining families. I could take in work mending, alterations, perhaps even dressmaking eventually. Virgil nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good idea. I could build you a proper workroom with good light." He hesitated, then added, "I've been offered steady work as a guide for the mining company surveyors. Turned it down before because I didn't want to be away from the cabin for stretches. But with you here, we could make it work," Hattie agreed. "Between your guiding and my sewing, we'd have a stable income alongside what the land provides." Their planning was interrupted by a spring thunderstorm that swept through the mountains with dramatic intensity. As lightning flashed and thunder rattled the cabin walls, Virgil and Hattie sat wrapped in a blanket by the fire, talking of dreams and possibilities until late into the night. When Hattie finally rose to retire to bed, Virgil caught her hand. "Stay," he said softly. "Not for. I mean, I'll still sleep by the fire, but just stay here with me a while longer." Hattie sank back down beside him without hesitation. "I'm not ready for the evening to end either," she admitted. They talked until the storm passed, and the fire burned low, sharing hopes and fears, memories and plans, each revelation bringing them closer. When Hattie eventually fell asleep against Virgil's shoulder, he carefully carried her to the bed, tucking the blankets around her with tender care before returning to his pallet by the dying embers. 2 days later, they made the journey to Butte. The town had grown considerably since Hattie had last glimpsed it from the stagecoach, new buildings rising seemingly overnight as the mining boom continued unabated. They made an odd pair riding double on Virgil's gelding, but he was past caring what others might think. Their first stop was the telegraph office, where Hattie sent messages to her cousin in San Francisco explaining her change in plans, and to the sheriff in Helena, providing her statement against Gerald Weissman. With those obligations fulfilled, they sought out the Methodist preacher who served the growing community. Reverend Michaels was a kindly man in his 50s who listened to their unusual story with compassionate interest rather than judgment. "God works in mysterious ways," he observed when they had finished. "Bringing two souls together through such extraordinary circumstances suggests a divine hand at work." They arranged for a simple ceremony 3 days hence, giving the Reverend time to post the required notices and allowing them to secure the necessary license. Before leaving his small church, Hattie hesitantly asked if the Reverend knew of any rooms to let in town. "I don't think it proper for us to return to the cabin together, now that we're, well, officially planning to marry," she explained, blushing slightly. Virgil hadn't considered this aspect of propriety, but he immediately understood Hattie's concern. After all she'd endured with Weissman's slander, she was understandably protective of her reputation. Reverend Michaels solved their dilemma by offering Hattie lodging with his own wife for the intervening days. Mrs. Michaels would welcome the company, he assured them, and no one would question the propriety of a bride to be staying with the preacher's family. With those arrangements settled, Virgil and Hattie parted ways, temporarily Hattie to the Michaels' home and Virgil to secure rooms at the modest hotel for himself. Before they separated, he pressed a small pouch of coins into her hand. For a proper dress, he insisted when she tried to refuse. Whatever you want. You deserve to be a real bride, not just a woman in a mended travel dress. Hattie's eyes softened. You don't need to do this. I want to, Virgil replied simply. Please. She relented, accepting the money with a grateful smile. I'll see you in 3 days then, at the church. I'll be the one waiting impatiently at the altar, he promised. The 3 days passed with agonizing slowness for Virgil. He used the time productively purchasing supplies for the cabin improvements they'd discussed, arranging for occasional work with the mining company, even visiting the barber shop for a proper haircut and shave. Still, he found himself counting the hours until he could see Hattie again, make her officially his wife. On the morning of their wedding day, Virgil arrived at the small church well before the appointed time, too nervous to remain in his hotel room any longer. He paced the wooden floor of the vestibule, adjusting his new collar and wondering if Hattie might have reconsidered. She'll be here, Reverend Michaels assured him, amused by the normally composed mountain man's evident anxiety. My wife helped her prepare this morning. Said she's never seen a more radiant bride. Virgil nodded gratefully, though his nerves remained on edge until the church door opened and Mrs. Michaels entered, giving him an encouraging smile before taking her place in the front pew. A moment later, Hattie appeared in the doorway, and Virgil's breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton, modestly cut but beautifully tailored to her slender figure, her own handiwork. He realized with a surge of pride. Her auburn hair was arranged in loose curls beneath a small hat, adorned with a single white ribbon. She carried a small bouquet of spring wildflowers gathered from the hills around Butte. But it was her expression that truly staggered him, the pure joy illuminating her face as their eyes met across the small church. In that moment, Virgil knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man alive. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish one another for all their days. When Virgil slid a plain gold band onto Hattie's finger purchased with the remainder of his savings, her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady as she made her promises to him. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Michaels declared warmly. Mr. Calloway, you may kiss your bride. Virgil cupped Hattie's face gently between his hands, marveling that this extraordinary woman was now his wife. Hello, Mrs. Calloway, he whispered before lowering his lips to hers in a tender kiss that sealed their union. They spent their first night as husband and wife in Virgil's hotel room, their lovemaking a tender exploration of newfound intimacy. Afterward, as Hattie lay nestled against his chest, Virgil stroked her hair and reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them together. If that stagecoach hadn't broken down, he murmured, if you hadn't fallen ill, if I hadn't decided to check my trap lines that particular day. Hattie pressed a kiss to his shoulder. Too many ifs to count. Maybe it was fate, or providence, Virgil suggested. I've never been a particularly religious man, but finding you makes me wonder if someone wasn't watching out for us both. I like to think so, Hattie agreed softly. That my parents are somewhere, smiling down on us. Virgil tightened his arms around her, overwhelmed by gratitude for this second chance at happiness for both of them. Whatever brought us together, I'm never letting you go. The next morning, they returned to the cabin, their home now, not just Virgil's. Hattie crossed the threshold as Mrs. Calloway, a transformation that seemed both momentous and entirely natural. They spent the rest of spring settling into their new life together, making the cabin truly their own. True to his word, Virgil built an addition to the structure, a bright workroom for Hattie with large windows facing south for optimal light. She arranged her sewing implements on the simple table he crafted, hanging fabric samples along the wall and setting up a small fitting area in one corner. Word spread quickly about the skilled seamstress living at the edge of town, and soon Hattie had a steady stream of customers making the journey to the cabin for her services. Her reputation for fine work and reasonable prices grew, bringing in a reliable income to supplement Virgil's occasional guiding jobs and the bounty of the land. Summer arrived, painting the mountain meadows with wildflowers and filling the forests with the songs of birds. Hattie planted a garden that flourished under her attentive care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. They added chickens, then a milk cow, gradually transforming the bachelor's hunting cabin into a proper homestead. In the evenings, they would often sit outside on the expanded porch Virgil had built, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked of the future children they hoped for, dreams still unfolding, but often they simply existed together in contented silence, Virgil's arm around Hattie's shoulders, her head resting against him. "You ever regret it?" Virgil asked one such evening as autumn's first crisp chill tinged the air. "Staying here instead of going to San Francisco?" Hattie looked up at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Never, not for a single moment." She took his hand, pressing it against her slightly rounded belly where their first child was beginning to make its presence known. "Everything I need is right here." Virgil covered her hand with his own, feeling the miracle growing beneath their joined fingers. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted quietly. "After the war, after everything, I thought that part of life was closed to me." "Life has a way of surprising us," Hattie murmured, leaning up to kiss him softly. "Sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we need to be." As winter returned to the mountains, bringing with it memories of their extraordinary beginning, Virgil often found himself marveling at how completely his life had transformed in a single year. From solitary trapper to husband, from wounded soldier to expectant father, from a man existing to a man truly living, all because he'd followed a simple human instinct to help a stranger in need. On the anniversary of the day he'd found Hattie beneath the wagon, a fierce blizzard swept through the mountains, reminiscent of the one that had nearly claimed her life. They sat before the fire in their now cozy cabin, Hattie's sewing set aside as she rested a hand on her growing belly. "1 year ago today," she mused, gazing into the flames, "I was certain I was going to die. I remember praying not for rescue, which seemed impossible, but just for peace, for an end to the pain and fear." Virgil took her hand, his thumb tracing the gold band on her finger. "And instead," Hattie turned to him, her eyes luminous with love and unshed tears. "Instead, I found everything I never dared to hope for: a home, love, family." She guided his hand to where their child kicked vigorously within her. A future. Virgil drew her into his arms, overwhelmed by gratitude for this woman who had brought such joy into his life. "I set out to fight death for a stranger," he murmured against her hair, "and ended up finding the reason to truly live." Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within the walls of their cabin, Virgil and Hattie Calloway had created a sanctuary of love that no storm could threaten, a testament to the extraordinary power of compassion, courage, and the unexpected journeys that lead us home.